let's start with the format of this history-making virtual draft. How much of a challenge will this be for NFL teams to pick the right players?
I think that the really good teams are still going to do a good job because they have the scouts in place that have been, they know the talent. And the good teams already have a development or a relationship between the scouts and the coaches. They know what they're looking for. The teams that I think are really going to struggle in this new era, is the teams that have a new staff, whether it be scouts or coaches or both, or any kind of turnover in that regard, or the teams that traditionally have relied on trades or relied on going with players that have, medical or character red flags. There's a lot more risk or reward in this draft.
How about for you and someone in your business? How difficult is it for you to keep track of all the talent and the things that you have to do to be effective?
Well, the biggest thing is so much of it is the technology is available now. We can just watch the tape. Where it's really been something problematic for me is I really enjoy going to pro day workouts and getting an opportunity to interview the players and get a feel for who they are. And then again, in the pro day workouts, you get a chance to actually see some football besides just on tape. And so I think that's an important part of the process, getting to know these young men as men, not just players. But at the same time, for the most of it, the hay is in the barn for most of us from a scouting perspective. You're able to watch on tape whether a guy has speed or quickness or power.
Well, you bring up the tape, and there's that saying that tape don't lie. And I would imagine that's especially true for everybody involved in this draft, huh?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is you have to, because we can't go outside of our normal way of evaluating players in terms of talking to people and things of that nature, you have to rely on the tape. And so many players who were left out of the combine process or were not able to participate in the senior all-star game, things of that nature, then scouts are forced to go back to the tape and watch how those players performed. And so that's going to make it that much more critical. It was important before. It's absolutely critical in the 2020 draft.
Let's talk Seahawks. 7 picks. Let's start with their first-round pick at 27. Do they trade it?
I believe that they will. Of course, John Schneider has traded the first selection 8 years in a row. The fact that they have a significant gap between the 4th and 6th round. They have one of the very last picks in the 4th round, one of the last picks in the 6th round. That's a 60-pick gap. And they do not currently have a 7th round selection. I would be surprised if the Seahawks do not try to trade back to acquire more of those day 3 picks. And the easiest one to do that would be with their first selection, number 27.
Would you put it past John Schneider to trade with Jacksonville for Ngakoue?
No, I think that's absolutely a possibility. In fact, I think that's probably the second most likely scenario behind just trying to retain Jadeveon Clowney. But if you're unable to retain Clowney, then I think it makes a lot of sense to trade for a proven commodity as the pass rusher rather than rolling the dice with some of the riskier draft prospects this year. Normally, I would say go with the younger, cheaper player. But this year's draft class among pass rushers is pretty weak, and the likelihood that there's going to be someone who can give you much immediate impact off the edge at number 27 is very slim. Certainly not as risky as making a trade for a proven pass rusher, still a very young one in Ngakoue.
Do you think that that's their biggest need is the edge rusher?
I do believe it's their biggest need. I don't think it's their only need. I believe that they need another defensive tackle. I think that their talented offensive tackle and at running back as well needs a boost. And I think that there's pretty extraordinary talent in this draft class at wide receiver and cornerback that I'd be surprised if Seattle doesn't try to take advantage of as well.
The receivers, I'm glad you brought that up because it seems from everybody in your field, the depth, they talk about the depth of receivers in this draft. Do you see the Seahawks taking advantage of that depth and drafting a receiver maybe in the first 3 rounds?
I think it's a possibility. I do not necessarily believe, again, that receiver is quite the area of concern. I mean, obviously, you have a young superstar in DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett is among the most consistent and reliable players at any position in the league, in my opinion. You like the addition of Philip Dorsett, a proven speedster. I think that he fits into the offense, but the talent this year at receiver, Paul, is remarkable. It's kind of a Baskin-Robbins choose your flavor. If you want a tall guy, a fast guy, I really really believe that Seattle could use a third receiver who is able to make somebody miss, break a tackle, and be able to run away from the defense. I think it's easy to forget that Tyler Lockett at his size and DK Metcalf with the durability issues that he had previously in his career, that Seattle doesn't have a lot of depth behind those two proven superstars. So you'd like to get a third playmaker to be able to make that one of the stronger position groups on the roster.
Well, let's stick with, you bring up durability at another position. Carson and Penny coming off of injuries. Do you see them getting a running back in this draft, maybe higher up?
I do, absolutely. I think that you look at the Seahawks ever since John Schneider and Pete Carroll took over, a running back has been a huge priority for them. They've selected at least one running back in 5 of the last 6 drafts, including twice using their first selection on a running back with Krista Michael and Rashad Penny. The running back class this year is also good. It's very talented, has some physical players who play kind of that Seahawks brand of football. Chris Carson struggled with fumbles and durability, and he's a pending free agent after next year. You can't. Everybody who has an argument against investing an early draft pick in a running back, the argument is even more against signing a veteran player to a big contract. So you have to replace those players somehow. So I do expect that the Seahawks will invest a selection in a running back relatively early, quite possibly even with their first or one of those second round selections, just because that's where the difference making talent lies.
Well, I like the fact that you put out recently your top 10 in all these positions. So you go through and you look at some of the names that get thrown out there, and Utah's Zach Moss seems to be one of those guys that would fit the bill for the Seahawks. Is outside of him, or maybe including him, do you see any other running back names that possibly could float to them?
Well, I think that if they were going to use the number 27 overall pick, then to me, there's only 2 running backs that really make a lot of sense for them. Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin, who is just literally, his statistics are through the roof. No player in the history of college football ran for more yards in their first 3 years than Jonathan Taylor did at Wisconsin. Of course, Russell Wilson's, alma mater. So that helps go up against pro-style defenses in the Big Ten. So he certainly would make some sense. He has the size, the strength, the speed that the Seahawks are looking for at 5'10", 226 pounds, ran a 4.39 in the 40-yard dash. Absolutely spectacular. DeAndre Swift is more the make-you-miss kind of a receiver out of the backfield. That would be an ideal pairing with a bulldozer like Chris Carson. Whereas with the aforementioned Taylor would be more of that kind of a replacement for a Carson, as kind of being that true bell cow. Zach Moss is probably available in the 2nd or 3rd round, has some make you miss, has some power, has also struggled a little bit with durability. That's one of the reasons why I think he is going to be available around later, but a terrific football player who has the elusiveness and the power the Seahawks are looking for. If they wound up with any one of those 3 running backs, as well as say a player like Boston College's A.J. Dillon, or J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State, those are my 5 top-rated backs for the Seahawks specifically, then I think that the Seahawks fans would be very happy with that.
How about as far as the offensive linemen? It seems like they stocked up in free agency on those guys, and they're maybe up to like 16 O-linemen right now. Do you see those guys getting another guy in the draft for the trenches?
I think that there's a possibility of that. You just look at the age and the length of the contracts for the 2 offensive tackles. Obviously, Dwayne Brown, you have an aging player, a very good player still, but an aging one at the left tackle position. And then you sign Brandon Shell to be the replacement, presumably, for Jermaine Ifedi at the right tackle position, but it's only a 2-year contract. And I don't see that the young talent waiting in the wings at those positions. Now that you did lose Ifedi, you did lose George Fant. Some of the other players that you mentioned that the Seahawks brought in, the number of players they brought in free agency, and most of those are interior offensive linemen. So I think there's a possibility they take advantage of this offensive tackle class. This is a very good offensive tackle class. It's right there with the receivers and cornerbacks, in my opinion, as far as being one of the strengths. The Seahawks love size and physicality at the point of attack, and this draft has a lot of them. So I think there's a possibility they invest one of those first 3 picks, either number 27, 59, or 64 overall, in an offensive tackle.
Is there a buzz around this team, or is there a subject that you've had to answer a lot of questions about when it comes to the Seahawks?
I think the biggest thing is I think there's just a general expectation that John Schneider is going to, somehow trade out of number 27 overall and try and acquire some extra picks. At the same time, whenever you try to operate out of a trade, then you have to, who are you trading with and what are they trying to acquire? The team that's selecting right behind Seattle, in number 28 overall, is the Baltimore Ravens, who in a lot of ways have a lot of similar areas of concern as the Seahawks. They're also a ground hill, very physical, run defense or a run and defense oriented type of a team. So I think that it's important for Seattle to consider their trade down possibilities, but at the same time, make sure that they do not kind of get too cute, because the Baltimore Ravens sitting one pick behind them, I think, are going to be in position to kind of take some of the players that Seattle would like to have on their roster as well.
When you look at the big picture, Rob, the top 10 picks are always pretty intriguing. Will LSU quarterback Joe Burrow go number 1 to Cincinnati? Is that almost just a foregone conclusion?
I believe it is a foregone conclusion that Joe Burrow, the Heisman Trophy winner, the reigning national champion, all that, this year's great story. I think he will go number 1 overall. The question is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals. If the Miami Dolphins and their 3 first-round picks they have this year, if they decide to package those deals and move up aggressively with Cincinnati Bengals, that's a franchise that could use all the draft capital they could possibly get. That said, I do believe that Joe Burrow would be a terrific fit in Cincinnati's offense. The head coach there, Zach Taylor, was the play caller previously with the LA Rams. He's using a spread offense that really does fit in very nicely with Joe Burrow's skill set.
Closer to home, UW quarterback Jacob Eason, you have him rated as a first or second round pick, I believe, when you list your top 10 of quarterbacks. And I mean, that's your rating. I'm not going to say that's where you think he's going to get drafted, because you made that clear on your site, which is awesome. You're just like, it's a disclaimer. It's like, folks, don't jump the gun. I'm not saying he's a first rounder. He's first and second round talent, right? That's kind of how you have him rated. So where do you think he might wind up? And of course, it's a loaded question, but any thoughts on Eason?
I really am a big fan of Jacob Eason's physical skill set. I mean, there is no question that Jacob Eason has the strongest arm in this draft class. And so for the teams that want a traditional downfield passer, traditional drop back quarterback, then Jacob Eason is going to be at the top of their list. He has struggled a little bit with consistency and decision making, and then he was not quite as impressive in the combine setting as I thought that he would be. I would argue that Jacob Eason, as well as some of the other local University of Washington players, were some of the big losers, unfortunately, by the pro day circuits being canceled, because a lot of them did not perform as well in Indianapolis, and they lost that opportunity to kind of restore their draft stock, so to speak, in a pro day situation. That said, I look at the fact that the Jacob Eason has been successful, obviously, at the University of Washington, going against Pac-12 talent, but also he did it at Georgia. And I look at some of the question marks and some of the other quarterbacks in this draft class. We talked about before with Joe Burrow. I love his mind and his accuracy, but he doesn't have an elite arm. He's not an elite athlete either. Some of the other quarterbacks like Justin Herbert for Oregon, for example, has flashed all types of incredible traits, but at the same time has struggled with consistency. And Tua Tagovailoa of Alabama, of course, has the medical issues that we're talking about. So really every quarterback has some question marks, and Jacob Eason is one of the few guys that has the actual physical traits that translate well to the NFL. So I do believe there's a possibility that some team trades into the late portion of the first round and selects him, because in the first round, those players can have a 5-year contract, and it makes a lot of sense from an NFL perspective to invest a pick in, say, a quarterback and get that 5th year relatively inexpensively. So I think there's a possibility there. In terms of talent, in terms of consistency, he probably should go in day two. That's where he'll likely go in the second or third round of the draft. But I believe that Jacob Eason projects as a starter, and NFL teams are always willing to throw a first-round pick at a quarterback who projects as a starter.
All right, just a couple more questions for you, Rob. You've been doing this a long time. Is there a sleeper pick or someone you think might go higher than expected in this draft?
Well, there's always going to be those kind of guys. There's a few players, a few safeties that I think are, because they play at small schools, they're not getting enough attention. Kyle Duggar from Lenoir-Rhyne, a tiny college, and then Jeremy Chin from Southern Illinois. Both of them are absolute playmakers playing at the small school level. You had a chance to go see them in person at the Senior Bowl. As you mentioned, Paul, I've been doing this for a long time, my 20th Senior Bowl. And so watching small schoolers go up against the elite players from the University of Washington or Ohio State or Alabama or Clemson and still perform very well there is absolutely absolutely an indication they're going to be successful in the NFL. So Kyle Duggar and again Jeremy Chin, the two safeties from those small schools, going to the Senior Bowl, being very impressive. Both running the 4.4s at 6'2", 220 pounds. Both of them doing that at the combine as well. I think those are two players that are likely to wind up being top, first or second round picks. And a lot of people across the country don't even know where those schools or those players are from.
I love that you brought up Lenore Ryan. I used to write for a newspaper down there, and I spent some time at that college. So when you brought that up, I'm like, man, that's a school from the old days for me, for sure. So I'm one of the few maybe out here that have heard of them. Let me ask you one more question about there's some teams that get it in the draft and some that don't. Can you tell me, in your opinion, in all the years you've done this, maybe a team that has struggled in the draft and maybe a team that has always seemed to excel in the draft?
Well, I think one of the teams that has struggled, I have to say, like the Cincinnati Bengals, the Miami Dolphins, some teams that I think have been a little bit more willing to roll the dice on character concerns or injury-prone players. Maybe haven't had quite the understanding between their scouting and coaching staffs and the owners. And so I think that's been a problem. Some of the better teams, just the teams that have had their scouting staff and coaching staff in place for a long time. And Seattle will be one of them. But Pittsburgh Steelers, New England Patriots, Minnesota Vikings, Philadelphia Eagles, Green Bay Packers, the teams that have a tradition and I think promote internally often, I think that they do a better job because there truly is an understanding between what the scouts are looking for and what the coaches actually want those players to be able to do.
How bizarre will this be for you watching a draft and everybody else virtually and all the stuff that's going to come with it next week?
Well, it's going to be bizarre. I mean, I'm so used to to watching Pete Carroll and John Schneider pop in after they make their selections and talk to us all of their at the VMAC and being able to kind of catch up with some of the professionals like yourself, Paul, that I only get a chance to catch up with maybe once or twice a year. So it's it's cutting into my social networking. I can tell you that right now.
Hey, there's a lot of fans of your work. Give people a chance. And where can they listen to you, and where can they find your information leading up to this draft?
Well, we have a lot of stuff that we posted through the magazine, Lindy's Pro Football Magazine. You can still buy that online if you're unable to go outside, and buy it actually in a store. And of course, doing a lot of work, through 950 KJR Sports Radio. Do a lot of work with the Ian Furness Show, as well as doing some TV work with him doing the draft as well.
You got a podcast too that you're on a regular basis?
Yeah, I joined Corbin Smith in the Locked On Seahawks podcast. That's been a lot of fun. We're just breaking down the Seahawks and information, and of course, right now we're focusing on the draft and unrestricted free agency, Jadeveon Clowney, and things like that. But if you are into the Seahawks, it's your team every day at LockedOnSeahawks.com.
That's great information, man. Rob, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Paul, as always.